Oh, yeah. It was hot. I was on a blimp, and I think a giant turtle showed up. Wow, what a day.
Hello, Ciano here.
I am going to speak my mind, and you are going to listen.
Sorry, I just got a little excited. Did you know that Avatar: The Last Airbender has a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes? Don't get me wrong, I think it's an incredible show, and it deserves 100%. It's a really good show. But this score, I'm not okay with. And I just don't get it. I mean, this show is so underrated. I mean, look at this. And I know we don't like sequels. Sequels are boring, they're cash grabs, and they're unnecessary. But that's not the case with Legend of Korra. I think that our love of Avatar: The Last Airbender gets in the way of us appreciating how great Legend of Korra is. And I want to change that. So let's start with Avatar: The Last Airbender, specifically episode 3, which I think is the first glimpse we get at how great this show can be. Aang, Katara, and Sokka are flying to the Southern Air Temple, and Katara warns Aang to prepare himself for the worst because no one has seen an airbender for 100 years. Aang, however, is confident that the airbenders found a way to evade the Fire Nation's attack. Meanwhile, Zuko is docked in a Fire Nation port, trying to quickly repair his ship when he gets confronted by Commander Zhao. Zhao is suspicious of the damage to Zuko's ship, and after interrogating the crew, he learns that the Avatar is alive, they had him in custody, and he escaped. This sets us up to watch both Aang and Zuko reconcile with what has become of their home. It's the first of many times that their stories mirror each other. Throughout the episode, we see why neither character can return home, and we see the precarious place that they both sit. One, the last surviving member of an entire culture, and the other, violently cast out of his home and his family by his own father. Later, both characters begin to lose their grip as they're forced to reckon with the traumas of their past. In Aang's flashback to his life at the Southern Air Temple, we meet Monk Gyatso. He was Aang's guardian, and though it's only hinted at here, what we eventually learned is that Monk Gyatso was the only person who was looking out for Aang the person, not Aang the Avatar. When the Fire Nation's army threatened war, the world called for a 12-year-old boy to sacrifice the only life he ever knew for the good of the world, and only Monk Gyatso saw the problem with that. Then, Aang discovers Monk Gyatso's corpse, surrounded by Fire Nation soldiers. Aang was confident that the air nomads were safe because no one can reach the air temples without flying bison, or so he thought. In this moment, Aang learns that it's likely his people have been wiped out by the Fire Nation, and that the only person who ever tried to protect Aang from the world died fighting a war that Aang was supposed to prevent. Back at the Fire Nation port, Zhao is preparing to leave when he says to Zuko that he is no threat to find the Avatar first because he is a worthless, banished prince. He tells Zuko that he has no home, no allies. Your own father doesn't even want you. I want to take a moment here to really consider the following interaction. Zuko claims that
You're wrong. Once I deliver the Avatar to my father, he will welcome me home with honor.
the way he phrases this shows how little he has been able to process what happened to him. Even though we don't know exactly what happened when Zuko was banished, we get a pretty good idea when Zhao points out that if his father cared about him, he would have been allowed to return to the Fire Nation even if he hadn't caught the Avatar. His scar is the very proof of how his father feels about him. Zuko challenges him to an Agni Kai, and he begins to struggle under Zhao's onslaught. Back at the mountain, Aang's grief awakens the Avatar spirit in him, and he begins airbending with so much force that he threatens to blow all of them off the mountain. And then they are both saved by someone who cares about them. Iroh gives Zuko guidance to win the fight, and when Zhao tries to strike Zuko when his back is turned, Iroh is there to stop it. Katara tells Aang that she understands his pain having lost her own mother in the war, but that her and Sokka are Aang's family now, and that they will protect him. We see both characters confront the horrors of their past, and both feeling burdened by a sense of blame for something that's beyond their control. Aang is not to blame for the Fire Nation's genocide, and Zuko is not to blame for his father's cruelty. But neither of them can move forward without a hand extended to them by someone who cares deeply about them. This is a kids show. When I see an episode like this, it's sometimes easy to forget. I think it's important for us to remember that a lot of Avatar: The Last Airbender is like this. One adventure per episode. The next 3 episodes are the same. The Aang gang lands, they interact with a new cast of characters, learn a lesson, and then they're forced to move on. This model is comforting. Who didn't have a TV show as a kid that had your attention once the theme song started playing? It didn't matter if you hadn't seen the episode before, or if you had. It's entertainment that doesn't require any investment past the time spent watching it. You don't need to have seen the episode where we learned that the spatula that SpongeBob uses was actually meant to be wielded by his childhood friend until their untimely demise, at which point he promised to use it until he became the world's greatest fry cook. It's clean and neat. Setup, conflict, resolution, credits. That's the model for the next 3 episodes. They still make the most of these episodes. They introduce characters that will return later on in the series, but the actual plot in these episodes is a little dull. Watching these episodes felt sort of like when you finally finish some basic chore that you've been putting off for a long time. It feels good once it's done, and it isn't like doing it was particularly arduous, but is it what I normally want to be doing? The Kyoshi warriors are cool. Sokka questioning his internalized misogyny is a great story, but it's the B-plot. The main plot line centers around Aang allowing his status as the Avatar to go to his head. It's always good to learn to stay humble, especially for a younger audience, and that's who the show is for. It's who it's aimed at. But once you reach a certain age, it's sort of slow and predictable. This isn't to say that all of these episodes are bad. You accept the Great Divide because sometimes you get moments like this.
Little soldier boy, come marching home. Brave soldier boy comes marching home.
Do you ever think about in Season 2, Episode 16, when Iroh yells at Zuko for risking his life for a destiny he doesn't even want? And do you ever think that maybe his anger comes from this fear that he might lose another son? All this to say, any sequel to this show was going to have a lot to live up to. The problem is that The Legend of Korra was intended for an older audience. Korra is 17, not 12. Well, technically Aang was 112, but mentally very much 12. My question is this: does Legend of Korra have weird pacing, or is it just that its pacing is very different from its predecessor because it's not a kids show? I'll attempt to answer that in the next video.
Can your fortune telling explain that?
Welcome back. Ciano here.
I'm the Avatar! You gotta deal with it!
I mean, she's not wrong.
I'm saving you for last. Then you'll get your duel, and I will destroy you.
Yeah, this isn't a kids show. Last time we discussed how Legend of Korra is often unfairly judged because it's being compared to a kids show. A great kids show, but still limited by the format of a kids show. So what is Korra able to do without those limitations? Well, we get incredible villains like Amon, the Red Lotus, and Kuvira. We see Korra struggling under the weight of the world and her new title. And we get to see the reality of her low points and the triumph of her finding the strength to fight after having her confidence shattered. And if it sounds like this show is just too dark for the Avatar universe, how about an entertaining love triangle that actually has a satisfying ending? But more on that later. Let's take a closer look at the first season, specifically how Korra's journey is not just a satisfying follow-up to Avatar: The Last Airbender, but a great story in its own right. There is a lot in the first episode of The Legend of Korra. First, we cover how Aang and his friends attempted to heal the world after the 100-Year War. They created Republic City, a place for refugees who were displaced by the war, and eventually, Aang passed on, and a search was conducted by the Order of the White Lotus to find the next Avatar. They find Korra at the age of 4, and she is immediately placed under their care. She lives in a fortress near the South Pole, and she has masters brought to her so that she's able to train far from any danger. It's already a big departure from Aang's journey to master all 4 elements. It makes sense that Aang instructed the White Lotus to do this. He set up the next Avatar to be the Avatar that he wished he could have been before he was frozen in the ice. And by those measures, he succeeded. Korra is strong. At 17, she has mastered 3 out of the 4 elements, with only air left. Yet, she struggles to connect to the spiritual side of being the Avatar, and we are forced to wonder whether this safe life spent in isolation was really the best thing for her. Korra eventually chooses to travel to Republic City, something that Tenzin and the White Lotus do not approve of. This is her first real decision as the Avatar, and it's a decision that is not examined enough. After all, Korra is our protagonist, and she's responding to the call to adventure. If we do consider everything happening at the time, though, we see that this decision is reckless. So let's consider who Korra is at this point. She's spent her whole life preparing to become the Avatar. She has had daily validation that she is a powerful bender, but she's also lived in isolation for most of her life. When she eventually arrives in the city, we see that not only is she completely ignorant of the growing divide between benders and non-benders, but she has a very loose grasp on basic concepts like money. It's something that Korra is forced to reckon with. This shining city that Aang created might not be as shiny as she thought. It isn't long before she comes across the uglier underbelly of Republic City. Gangsters run rampant, using their bending to extort money out of non-bending citizens. She learns about the harsh reality of living on the street from Bolin and Mako, 2 brothers who were orphaned at a young age and who eventually form half of her Team Avatar. These are issues that Korra hasn't considered before, having been carefully protected since she was a child. The issues facing her and Republic City don't have an easy solution. Unlike in Aang's time when most problems could be solved by a strong bender, Korra finds that she cannot just overpower her enemy. It's been almost 20 years since Aang died, and the city continued on without him as one of its pillars of justice. Shortly after arriving in Republic City, she's arrested by the metal-bending police force and told by Chief Lin Beifong, Toph's daughter, that she isn't needed in the city. Even though Tenzin eventually agrees to allow Korra to stay in the city, it's because of his respect for the word of the Avatar, but we see that he is still very unsure with that decision. Think about the adult figures of authority in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Of course, there are adults who maybe aren't the wisest, but the ones who are meant to be the good guys, the wise counsel to the main characters, they rarely waver in what is the right thing to do. Even when they are forced to make difficult decisions, Aang and his friends are able to trust them completely as allies. Korra has Tenzin, who is a steadfast ally, but he also has his moments where he's forced to admit that he isn't sure what to do, as he is in a similar boat as Korra. Although he has trained his children to airbend, this is an entirely different job. Korra shows little aptitude for airbending at first and struggles to learn, and he has to figure out how to teach Korra. That's not even to mention Tarlok, who masquerades as her ally only for it to be revealed that he is weaponizing the police force against non-benders, capitalizing on the divide caused by the Equalists, in order to gain more power in the city. Ozai was scary, but at least he was openly evil. But this is part of the complexity present in Korra's world that wasn't there for Aang. Aang's world was desperate for any form of justice at all. Korra must operate around a police force that is not attempting to maintain peace, but to enforce the will of the ones on top. So yeah, not nearly as comforting a show as Avatar: The Last Airbender. But within these darker plotlines, there are moments that burn brighter because of how grim things are. Let's return to that moment from earlier. Korra is here, at the mercy of her biggest threat because of that decision she made all the way back in the South Pole. She came into the city brimming with confidence, and after a run-in with Amon where she saw him take away a person's bending, she sees how dangerous the world can be. She tries to bury her fear, unwilling to admit even to her closest allies that she is terrified. That fear is then used to manipulate her into joining Tarlok's task force, the start of his plan to use this division in the city to seize more power. Korra winds up here, captured by Amon because she had challenged him to a duel. We see that Korra does this not necessarily because she can win, but because she wants it to end. She is tired of being afraid. But here she learns that the first step to overcoming her fears is to admit them. Of course, Amon lets her go, because killing her now would only make her a martyr. It goes back to Amon being a fantastic villain. He is in control. This isn't a case of a villain caught monologuing. His actions are calculated, and he is always a step ahead. In addition, he works in the morally gray. He kidnaps benders and forcefully takes their bending away, but they're all notorious criminals and gangsters. He interrupts the Pro Bending Championships, and he then validly criticizes the whole event as the title match was fixed by last year's champion. Maybe they don't deserve to have their bending taken away, but Amon's motivations are not reprehensible, or so we think. It's eventually revealed that Amon is actually Noatuk, son of Yakone, a famous gangster who clashed with Avatar Aang. He was nearly able to defeat Aang because of his ability to bloodbend without a full moon. Aang took away Yakone's ability to bend, but he was able to escape prison and flee to the North Pole, where he had Noatuk and forced him to learn to bloodbend. But Yakone had two sons, Noatuk, who was a bloodbending prodigy, and Tarlok, the councilman who attempts to use this rift in society to seize power. Yakone was cruel and abusive to both boys, ridiculing Tarlok for his hesitancy to bloodbend and placing all of his expectations for revenge on Noatuk, constantly pushing him to become stronger. Two boys, raised by a monster, grew up to become monsters themselves. After Korra confronts Tarlok over his abuse of power, he attacks her and is able to subdue her because of his ability to bloodbend. He intends to keep Korra captive so that he can maintain his power. Amon, or Noatuk, launches a violent coup in Republic City, where he begins to cleanse the benders of their impurities. Both of them grew into power-hungry narcissists, but Noatuk is a much bigger threat. His idealized version of equality was warped by Yakone's abuse. It's equality without empathy. He is able to use non-benders' distrust of benders to create himself an army. Tarlok was using the benders' fear of Amon to amass his own power. After he gets captured by Amon, he recognizes him as his brother. And it's only then that he realizes the monster he has become, but far worse, the monster his brother has become. Korra defeats Amon, but he's able to escape. He goes to Air Temple Island, where he's holding his brother prisoner, and he asks if Tarlok will come with him. This isn't the first time he asked him this question. This time he agrees to go, which brings us to this.
The two of us together again. There's nothing we can't do.
Yes, Noatak.
Noatak. I had almost forgotten the sound of my own name.
It will be just like the good old days.
It feels like Tarlok knows that if he had gone with his brother, maybe they could have saved each other. Now things have gone too far. His decision to blow up their boat feels like his final attempt to redeem himself. He couldn't prevent Noatuk from becoming this, but at least he could end his cruelty. Let's go back to Korra. In her fight with Amon, she has her bending taken away. She was only able to defeat him because, in a moment of desperation, she found her ability to airbend for the first time. Still, the rest of her bending is gone, and despite the efforts of Katara and her water healing, that bending remains blocked off. Korra rides off into the frozen tundra after telling Mako that she isn't the Avatar anymore. Throughout this whole adventure, Korra's been forced to reconsider what it means to be the Avatar. It's revealed in this moment that she still sees her power as a bender as the only value she has as the Avatar. She eventually finds herself at the edge of an icy cliff, and she is staring down at the drop below. We can see how hopeless she feels, even contemplating ending her own life. But she's stopped by a vision of Aang, who says that she was the one who called him to her. When she asks why, he responds,
When we hit our lowest point, we are open to the greatest change.
It's moments like this that you can't really approach in a kid's show, but it would be ridiculous to think less of Avatar: The Last Airbender simply because it doesn't conform to a show for young adults. And I think we should celebrate a show that drops lines like that. Don't worry, I didn't forget about the love triangle. It'll be coming up in the next episode.
Does he drive you crazy in a bad way? Or does he drive you crazy like you like him?
Welcome back. Ciano here.
Admit it. You like me.
No, I'm with Asami.
Yeah, but when you're with her, you're thinking about me, aren't you?
And so on. The love triangle. Whether we're talking Peeta or Gale, Edward or Jacob, Patrick or Art, people love themselves a good love triangle. As promised last time, let's explore the more fun side of Legend of Korra. Although love triangles are fairly common, Legend of Korra is the rare example of a love triangle with a good ending. But what makes a good ending? In my opinion, it comes down to whether or not the protagonist made the right decision. Whether that's person A or B, or to walk away from the situation entirely, I want to feel like the creator didn't just flip a coin. Here we come to the delicate balancing act. Because if you want us to be invested, then at least in the beginning, we as the audience need to understand why the character is conflicted. The problem for the creator comes when it's time for the final decision. There are many pitfalls that detract from a story's ending. If in the third act, you make one potential option egregiously worse than the other, you leave people with a bad taste in their mouth. This isn't just a love triangle problem. In many series, we've invested time into learning about these characters, and it feels like the creator cut corners. Characters shouldn't change because the story has entered a new act. The story should enter a new act because of the decisions made by the characters. Legend of Korra is able to subvert expectations, but do it in a way where we as the viewers can look back at the series and see that the ending was being set up. So let's get into it.
Well, whatever happened with Mako, I'm glad it hasn't come between us. I've never had a girlfriend to hang out with and talk to before.
This phase takes place mostly in Season 1. We see the most rapid back and forth between Korra and Mako and Asami and Mako. As I discussed in the previous video, the first season is very much a coming-of-age story for Korra. She's taking up the mantle of Avatar, exploring the good and bad of industrialized living, and she is learning that nothing is quite as simple as she thought it would be. So it makes sense that Korra also learns about the complexities in romantic relationships. I've heard people say that they don't like how much drama goes on within this Team Avatar. To some extent, I see where they're coming from. Korra actually starts things off in a different love triangle, one where Bolin likes her, she likes Mako, and Mako's brooding. Then Asami gets added into the mix, and yeah, there are a lot of hurt feelings. In my opinion, I feel like they perfectly captured the crush mentality of young adulthood. The feelings burn bright and hot and often lead to embarrassing moments. It's not for everyone, but I think they do a good job of giving us these funny, awkward moments, but still giving the characters respect. Bolin thinks that he's winning Korra over, and then he sees her kissing Mako. He is hurt, he drowns his sorrows in noodles, but at the end of the day, he cares about Korra. And he still treats her as his friend. And I didn't mean to get so gushy in this section. Like, let's just give credit to a show for providing an alternative example to the idea of friendship versus romantic entanglement. Bolin is hurt, but he understands that Korra didn't mean to hurt him. And again, he's still her friend despite the fact that she rejected him. Apologies for the tangent. The main outcome of the main love triangle in this period is that Mako tells Korra that he loves her and they end up together. Yeah, if the story ended here, it would not be a good ending. Thank goodness the show got 3 more seasons.
What lovely young women. Mako, why aren't you dating any nice girls like them?
During season 2, we see Mako and Korra as a pair, and it isn't as neat and easy as we might have expected. What they fight over are not silly things. Korra is trying to remain an impartial avatar as her southern tribe gets conquered by her uncle, who manipulated her into opening the spirit portal so that he can fuse with the evil spirit Vaatu and become another avatar. Yeah, season 2 wasn't the best. But it did do the work to set up that satisfying ending. Romantically speaking, this season reminds me a lot of The Graduate. I'm just going to touch on this quickly, so all you really need to know is that this guy interrupted this girl's wedding to proclaim that he loves her. She agrees to run away with him, and this is the shot of them at the end of the movie. In this final glimpse of the happy couple, the veil of Hollywood is pulled back a bit. Look at their faces. This may be what is supposed to happen in a rom-com, but honestly, these two barely know each other. They acted completely on impulse, and I think it's evident that both of them are beginning to doubt whether they are prepared for what comes next. In Legend of Korra, the story doesn't end with Mako telling Korra he loves her. In season 2, we see their struggles. It shouldn't come as a surprise either. Both of these characters are headstrong and poor communicators. There is some telenovela-style memory loss moments where Korra and Mako break up, and then Korra forgets that happened, and in the meantime, Mako kinda got back together with Asami, and then when Korra shows up again, he sorta just goes along with it. Remember how I said that we want to see the protagonist make the right decision at the end? Well, this is a good way to do that. Not the memory loss, that felt a little strange, but we see the characters mess things up with each other. Mako should have been upfront with Korra when she forgot about their breakup, but at the same time, Korra had just narrowly survived a brush with death, and she was gearing up for a fight over the fate of the universe. There were better ways to go about it, but we can see that Mako's decision isn't a selfish one. He is hurting Asami and lying to Korra, but he's trying to do the right thing. It doesn't make it okay, but it allows us to fully agree with Korra at the end of this season when she tells Mako that they do not work as a couple. And then that brings us to part 3.
So, what now? Back to the dance floor?
I'm kind of all danced out. Honestly, after everything that's happened the past few months, I could use a vacation.
You might notice that this part is much longer than the first 2, and that's because as far as strict plot points go, not much happens between the 3 of them. Korra faces down arguably the best villains in the series, and her storyline changes. While the first 2 seasons felt like Korra learning that she must re-examine how she views the world, the 3rd and 4th seasons focus on how Korra views herself. She has her confidence shattered again, not by being overwhelmed by the state of the world, but by what she has to go up against. Both the Red Lotus and Kuvira have a deeper connection with Korra. Even if it wasn't intentional, she allowed these individuals to gain power, and what's worse, they both wish to provide an alternative to her, the Avatar. It leads her to question things within herself. That doesn't mean that they abandon the romantic plot. What we see instead is a slow burn of moments between Korra and Asami. They bond over Mako feeling understandably awkward around both of them. And when Korra is injured in her fight with Zahir, the only person that she writes letters to is Asami. We see how they both support and care for each other, and yet because it's not the focus, but in the background, we don't necessarily notice it right away. So yes, Korra ending up with Asami is the right decision. Now, if you watched Korra and never went online, you might have completely missed this. After all, her relationship with Asami, while well set up, is never explicitly stated. Things were different in 2012 when the show came out. Korra paved the way for better representation in animated series. By today's standards, it feels sort of weak. But at the time, having an openly gay protagonist in an animated series aimed at young adults was unheard of. The show creators specifically said they wanted to have Asami and Korra kiss at the end, but they were stopped by Nickelodeon. Instead of bemoaning what could have been, let's appreciate what we got. Korra being gay wasn't some lazy retconning after the fact, when there was little to no evidence of that being true. We shouldn't be surprised either. The show's creators are masters of hiding things in plain sight. Think about in Avatar: The Last Airbender when Jet dies. Obviously, they couldn't show him dying on camera, so instead they made it clear through context. His allies say that they will stay with him because Jet is their leader, and they urge Aang and his friends to keep going. Jet reassures Katara that he will be fine, and Toph says that he's lying. It isn't visually confirmed, but we never see Jet again, and the heavy implication is that he's dead. It's the same with Korra and Asami. We see them growing closer, at first rivals, before they get to know each other, and eventually they realize how deeply they both care for each other. And even if Nickelodeon didn't let them confirm it on screen, the comics that start where the show ends shows them together. It's an ending that subverts expectation because, personally, I didn't think a show made by a big network at this time would have allowed for an ending like this. But upon rewatching it, it's really impressive how they were able to tell a story with so much unrequited love that accurately captures some of the more hormonal moments of growing up while still giving us an ending that feels right and created the first openly gay protagonist in an animated series. If you still prefer Avatar: The Last Airbender, I get it. To be honest, I didn't think I would change anyone's preference. But as we wrap up this series, at least for now, I hope that you can see how both shows succeeded within their respective roles. And hopefully, Korra finally gets her flowers. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing. It's the best way to help out the channel. While this is the last part I've planned to do in the Avatar universe, please let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more. If you want to see what else I'm working on, I've included a link to my Substack and my serialized novel below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.